Cosatu says the passing of the national minimum wage bill is a historic and progressive move by Parliament. It says the bill will bring about change to South Africa's labour legislation. Sizwe Pamla, Cosatu Spokesperson, joins us in studio. Thanks for your time, Sizwe. Appreciate it. So you're a step closer to actually getting this signed into law, but there's still opposition from SAFTU saying that this legislation is disgusting.
Well, look, you will always have critics. For you to make progress, you have to live with that reality, with that fact. There are three federations who are fully behind the national minimum wage. There are 6.4 million workers who will be the beneficiaries of the national minimum wage. And we think that as soon as the minimum wage is implemented, it will allow us to then start a conversation about a living wage. And that is not something that you legislate. It's something that we'll have to fight for. It's something that we'll have to campaign for. Already in these sectors where most unions organize, they have set their minimum wage targets. And for us, really, we view this as a victory for the workers, because there are workers who are at the bottom end of that salary scale who will be benefiting. That's what's important to us.
So tell me more about those workers. I want to know about how much people actually earn if it's lower than 3,500 Rand, and which industries are particularly affected by this.
If you go to the farm industry, the farm workers, for example, the farming sector, you have workers who earn up to 8 Rand an hour in the farming sector. And what makes it funny is the fact that there is a SAFTU affiliate there called FAO that organizes those very same farm workers. And it has not waged any fight really to improve the lot of those workers. And if you go to the petroleum industry, the petrol attendants, you have some petrol attendants who earn 15 Rand an hour. And most of them, again, are represented by NUMSA. And NUMSA has actually signed a deal with the sector there, allowing the sector to pay those workers 15 Rand. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy when you hear the noise, considering the fact that in the agreements that they themselves have signed, they have allowed employers to pay the workers less than that. Let's go to the services industry. If you look at restaurants, if you look at hotels, there are still waitresses and waiters who actually earn around about 18 Rand an hour. So there are many in the retail industry. Again, one of the sectors that is very exploitative. What is even more said about the retail industry is that most of those workers are casualized, which is why then it's important to have a minimum wage that talks to an hourly pay, because some of those workers do not have the opportunity to work the kind of hours that an average employee works.
So it works out to around 3,500 Rand a month, right?
Well, it works out to around 3,500 for 40 hours, and if 45 hours a week, then that's 3,900.
Okay, yes. But even if it's 4,000 or 4,500, you can't buy a house with that money. And that's yes. One of the arguments that's been made when it comes to the minimum wage.
Indeed. In fact, if you want to make that argument, you know that out of 1.3 million public servants, 900,000 of them do not have houses, and they earn more than that. What we need to realize is that minimum wage is not a magic wand. It's not a silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems. For an example, let us look at the fact that there are 11 million highly indebted South Africans out of a workforce of 16 million. Now, what that tells you is the fact that we need to talk about a public transport system that forces workers to spend 15% of their income on public transport because of the apartheid special planning. We need to address the issue of a public transport system. And let us have a conversation about the fact that most of South Africans, more than, I think, 85% of them depend on public healthcare system. A public healthcare system that is really collapsing on its own. They don't have medical aid. That's when you come in and bring in interventions like the National Health Insurance. Let's talk about comprehensive social security. Generally, that brings in all of these issues. So you can, for an example, for argument's sake, pay someone 12,500. They will still not be able to actually afford most of the things that workers should be able to afford, because there is so much that is wrong with the system as a whole. So what we need to do is to make sure that gradually, currently Cosatu is leading a campaign for NHI. So the minimum wage combined with NHI, comprehensive social security, public transport system, what it allows you is to have a foundation that will allow you to firstly transform the labor market system, at the same time lift the many workers who are highly indebted, because there are workers who actually earn 20,000 but who cannot afford to buy houses. So it's because of the system as a whole, not necessarily because it's their fault.
It's a long-term strategy that you're working on. You're not saying 3,500 rand is okay entirely, but that's what you're going to settle on while you work on other things, while you try to get more money at a later stage. I mean, SAFTU argues that the ANC-led government is basically legitimizing poverty by allowing for a 3,500 rand a month salary.
Look, what the ANC-led government is dealing with is that it is trying to transform a system that was designed. This was a system that was engineered to actually put most of workers, especially black workers, under a low-wage regime. So to transform that, you are not going to wave a magic wand. You have to deal with the fact that currently, for an example, we are hemorrhaging jobs at such an alarming rate already, meaning that you can't get into a conversation about any policy and then you say you are not going to listen to anyone who raises the issue of job losses. So when we were engaging on the minimum wage, we demanded more than, we were actually sitting at between 4.5 and 5.5. But we had to reconcile these competing claims from social partners. At the same time, trying to allay our social partners' fears of job losses. So at the end of the day, workers are already competing with machines. So you are going to have to go into that negotiation process with that very clear appreciation to say, you can't really take a hardline position on some of the issues when the reality is that even the Labour Relations Act does allow actually employers to replace workers with the machines. So in terms of trying to deal with the current situation in South Africa of unemployment, of the low-wage regime, of poverty, unfortunately, we have also have to deal with globalization. The fact that we also still continue, we need to have a competitive economy. Yeah. We need to be competitive generally.
Just one last thing quickly. How many members did you say you guys represent, the three federations?
We represent with more than 3 million. I don't know about a specific figure, but all of the three federations represent more than 3 million.
So how do you check with those more than 3 million people whether they are okay with you endorsing this?
Well, firstly, this was a look. Most federations have got unions, meaning that, for example, Cosatu has got affiliates. So whatever is it that you do, you are mandate-driven. You go back, you make presentations, and then unions do the consolidation of the mandate, and then they bring it to the federation. And look, this process, it has taken more than 5 years, just at NEDLEC, and now that it is in Parliament. It's been exhaustive. Of course, you are not going to have a unanimous. No one can ever claim that you have a unanimous support. But if the general sentiment is that this is the step, this is a good foundation, it's going to allow us to build towards a living wage, it's going to allow us to do much more than we have done over the last 24 years, then that's what you do. You actually implement that mandate, and this is what we are doing.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. That was Cosatu Spokesperson Sizwe Pamla.